已经操在整个人民司机的手里，那么整个就会要像一个什么东西呢？像一个太阳一样，太阳升起是奔放了，以世界辉煌的光影普照大地，迅速地上帝马上就停下来，这就是上升气的一个那是象征的世界的神话意义。不是神话民国，并不是
Totalitarian Tuesday with Chris Wilkinson. We've got a state-funded Chinese paper in front of us, but don't worry, it's in English. It's called the China Daily Global Weekly, and
at least some of the authors are in fact English.
Yes. The headline is "Leading the Way: China set to play crucial role in global recovery, experts say." China could emerge from the pandemic a more dominant economy, replacing the United States as the world's largest within the current decade. The world's second largest economy has the potential to lead the global economy out of recession in the months ahead. Chris Wilkinson.
I think this is pretty much a given, because it's already been predicted that China, the fastest growing economy in the world, was going to overtake the USA at some point. So it's just stating the obvious, really. Why would you want to do that?
And also, of course, this is the same story on page 3. It's a continuation of it, if there's anything you want to pick apart. But it's amazing what you can do without human rights and employment rights, isn't it, Chris?
Well, you brought to my attention the fact that they had essentially retrofitted a MAN lorry, an MAN lorry, with the initials JAC.
Yeah, and you could tell from the shape of the chassis and everything that it was a direct copy. Here it is.
It's the same lorry. It's the exact same lorry that they've just put different letters on. And I think
which leads into another story, which obviously isn't addressed in this state-run Chinese paper. The idea that there are lots of people in the West, a lot of Chinese people in the West, that are responsible for a lot of industrial espionage.
Well, there's a lot of companies and headquarters being located in China. I think companies like Reebok have actually gone back to China. You know, they've been there before in the past. They've gone to all sorts of different countries. They've gone back to China. Now, why is that? Why? Their market is not in China. Just because it's cheap doesn't make it better. This feeds into sort of the corporate greed of the current system. And China is an active facilitator of this, because it's pioneering all of these state-funded infrastructure projects and things like that. So countries in Africa, which is a topic that we might get onto, have been the beneficiary of Chinese state investment in their railways, in their roads, in their Benjamin Alexander Gulliford little tickets here.
Well, the other issue is, of course, is that with all the workers in Europe furloughed, is that a lot of businesses may realise they actually don't need to run offices, at least at the pay and with the worker protections that we have in Europe.
Yeah, although of course you've got to remember that in Britain we have workers' rights at a vastly higher level than the European Union average.
Well, so the next story: Wuhan may not be virus transit point. It could have been circulating in bats for decades before it jumped to humans. And I don't want to steal the words out of your mouth, but the fact that it's in a state propaganda newspaper by the Chinese government, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist about coronavirus at all, but the fact that this story is being run as it's come from bats does make me slightly suspicious of the origins of COVID-19.
There's been, I think it was Professor Nikolai Petrovsky who has stated a couple of months ago, sort of renowned academic in bioscience or whatever, in medicine, and he's basically saying you can't rule out the fact that COVID-19 originated from somewhere other than a wet fish market or a bat market or whatever it was in Wuhan in China.
Well, it goes on to...
Just by coincidence, there is a disease research centre in Wuhan, China.
Yes, a virology place. Yes, I'm aware of that. But it says here, in response to what you've just said, the city had a surveillance system designed specifically for picking up atypical pneumonia cases. He said a routine news briefing. It was there for a very specific purpose, and the fact that the fire alarm was triggered doesn't necessarily mean that is where the disease crossed from animals into humans. Now, in light of what you've just said, that actually does... Bear in mind, this is propaganda and not actual news. And you mentioned the virology department, that maybe the reason that they have stringent pneumonia policing system in Wuhan is due to the fact that they've got a virology department.
Well, how much do you trust this author who's called Zhang Zhizhao? I mean...
Yeah.
You know, who is this person? Where is he getting his information from? Because I don't see any sort of reference to anything other than an elitist or globalist organisation. You've got the WHO Director General mentioned there.
It's mentioned quite a lot in this newspaper, actually, as a I think maybe some cynics might say a pariah.
In fact, hold on, how many times is it
a pariah second organisation?
It's mentioned at least half a dozen times, probably.
Do you see what I'm saying? Because
in that one article, it's mentioned half a dozen times.
Yeah, and it's not a particularly long article, but obviously there's a lot of theories as to China's influence on the World Health Organization, and for it to be mentioned this often would seem to be that's the sort of the £5 note being dangled in front of the reader to try and make them believe that there's actually some plausibility in the story.
Who's reading this? I mean, we bought this in a WH Smith's because we thought, it's something different and it's something we can...
And we were surprised to see it.
Yeah, and we can trash the reputation of it, and we looked through it.
Rightfully trash the reputation. It is propaganda, after all.
There is not a single advert in this newspaper which proves the fact that it is completely state-funded by the Chinese.
And also, another fact that makes it a bit suspicious as to the authenticity of some of the stories is the fact that you mentioned Zhang Zhizhao. He is actually written, I think, over there's three articles by him, and there was loads more in the back when we were going through it, looking at the stories to pick. So, it's obviously not a genuine newspaper, and though it does look and is designed very well, actually better laid out than some UK newspapers. To be fair,
just to go back to the point about corporatism and the fact that most things made in China now because it's cheap. Just because it's cheap doesn't mean it's high quality. And one of the great things that has happened as we've seen production move further to the east into China, we've seen a massive reduction in the quality of goods and services that have been provided. Despite the fact that unit labour costs have gone down because of a higher value currency in the West, they've got a comparatively lower value currency. They've got less workers' rights. What on earth is the justification for the lower quality of goods and services when the differential between the cost of producing goods and the cost of selling goods has essentially expanded?
Yeah, and also I'd like to say in support of that is that obviously in the West now there's a lot of support for, I think we could sort of say, the value of human life with certain social movements that are going on, and for the continued resurgence or onsurge of China would show a bit of hypocrisy in those movements. Yeah, and you've just pointed me to a story that we nearly overlooked. U.S. military urged to stop provocative acts. This again by Zhang Zhizhao. The Chinese military has urged the United States to stop its provocative actions in the South China Sea and stop sowing discord in the region, while experts warn... The experts in this paper, we've gone through quite a lot of the stories and read them reasonably thoroughly before we started. A lot of these experts are never named at all. So China has an undisputable sovereignty over the islands and their adjacent waters in the South China Sea. So that means Taiwan, basically,
or Hong Kong, even.
Says Senior Colonel Ren Guoqiang.
We can't even pronounce their names, let alone read what
Let's not get into not pronouncing their names, because we want to try and maintain some moral high ground with this. But so yes, the US military is the one being provocative.
I think that is ridiculous. I mean, if you consider the fact that China's negligence has led to a global pandemic of a virus, and they're now complaining of the fact that certain countries are starting to get a little bit annoyed at the negligence they've shown. And I think it was in a later story that we might have a look at, about China has shown the world, like, you know, they've given full support for this, that and the other and things like that. There hasn't been any of that at all.
The other issue is that we might want to talk about is there's a lot of people in the West that have become aware from a lot of very intelligent dissenting voices, like what's his name? Noam Chomsky. Dissenting voices like Noam Chomsky, and are actually blinded by their contempt for Western foreign policy, that they can't see that China is a completely contemptible nation. And people really do need to start picking a side here, don't they?
Well, yeah. But they also need to reject any notion of idealism. And this goes back to an earlier conversation before this at another pub, which was about... It's fine to be political, but unless it's grounded in sort of realistic day-to-day issues, what really is the worth of that which you are advocating? I don't think it's very much in this. I don't think it's very much in this case.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next story, which is on page 11. I should have had that one prompted before we started. Okay, Southeast Asia battles virus resurgence. Southeast Asia, praised for its success against COVID-19, is once again enforcing control efforts amid rising infections. The reason we circled this is because there has been a PPE fashion show in China, and you can see the picture there. I'll put a photograph of this on the story, and it looks as mental as one might think.
It reminds me of the way that Marty McFly looked in Back to the Future when they were handling the radiation that was powering the plutonium, rather, that was.
I mean, you've got carrier bags on the shoes, a sort of. What are they called? The people that investigate.
It's like a hazmat suit.
Yeah, like a hazmat suit with gloves, a large face mask that goes that's suspended by the shoulders, with a mask underneath, and then a visor, and then a hood. I mean, this is pretty crazy.
Ridiculous levels of protection when any virologist of a reputable nature would tell you that in order to get over a virus or a pandemic of this sort, which by the way is not very deadly, it's about, in this country, I think 0.073% of people have died of it.
Yeah.
Which is pretty much less than the amount of people who've died of cancer over the same period, or of seasonal flu.
And it's showing no natural signs of any significant curve coming up again.
And the extreme measures that are being taken now on the downward curve are absolutely without base. But what a virologist will tell you is that you need a virus to spread quicker and faster throughout the population to achieve the herd immunity, and then it will simply disappear.
What do you say to people that say that the herd immunity idea is a eugenicist or eugenicistist?
This claim has been levelled against me. And
I was thinking other senior people like Dominic Cummings.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't think they understand what eugenics actually is, first of all. Secondly...
what is eugenics, Chris?
Well, eugenics is the idea that you can create a perfect race by genetic engineering. This has nothing to do with genetics. This is everything to do with virology, which is a completely different thing.
Yeah, separate strand of science.
Yeah.
So...
You know, a virologist will tell you, let this spread... After a certain point, as we achieve herd immunity, which is a legitimate thing that we have to achieve to get over this, the rate of infection and the rate of death will simply drop off the map, as it has done in Sweden, which hasn't had a lockdown.
Yeah.
and has come through it with their economy intact.
I think a lot of people also think herd immunity means everybody has to be immune to it, which is not what it means, is it?
The estimates are 60 to 80%.
I'm saying that it's not. It doesn't literally mean everyone's immune to it.
Yeah, it doesn't mean everyone, which means even on 60 to 80%, you could legitimately protect the 20% of people who make up the population who are over the age of 75, who are deemed as vulnerable people. You can keep them away and still get over the virus.
Yeah, so moving on to the next story. US Senator defends China against suit. A United States Senator described China as a respectable nation and that it is a huge mistake to allow American citizens to sue China over coronavirus damage, as she defended the nation in a firm speech against a bill authorizing such a move. Where I live, we hold China as a potential trading partner, as a country that has pulled tens of millions of people out of poverty in a short period of time, and is a country growing into a respectable nation amongst other nations. I wonder if that short period of time includes Chairman Mao's tenure as leader of the Chinese Communist Party.
It doesn't say who this senator is, but I could suspect that they're Democrat.
It's Feinstein, so yeah.
Yeah, so I'd imagine they're Democrat, but they don't say that. But the important thing here, from the reading we've done of it, is that they said that China, what is it? China is a respectable country.
Yeah, a respectable nation.
A respectable nation. I don't really.
What is there to respect about China?
Yeah.
Or at least it's how it's led by the Chinese Communist Party.
Poverty thing, like they put a line in there about the poverty.
Yeah, but it made millions of people out of poverty in a short space of time.
So if their definition of getting people out of poverty is a form of economic enslavement, whereby state China owns the infrastructure of your railways, your roads, the office in which you work, all of your houses and things like that, which is the case, particularly in Africa, then are you really alleviated from poverty, or are you just economically enslaved?
Yeah.
There is a huge difference. One is, it's just window dressing, really. It's covering over what is legitimately wrong.
It seems like people that criticise Castro for the very heinous things he's done, police state and things, but then you get those people on the other side that justify it because the school system was good, or the quote-unquote the healthcare system was good. I mean, these things are just very tokenistic when compared to the actual reality of living in a country like that.
But this is how socialists or communists measure success. They measure it through institutions which they also control. So it's quite a bizarre arrangement. That'd be just like saying, well, you know what? It doesn't matter that students are living in squalor, in mud huts or anything like that. But guess what? They're all passing with commendations and things like that. So long as the results are there, it doesn't really matter about anyone else's life.
Yeah, for those that are interested in people in the West that support China ideologically, should read a left Marxist writer, philosopher called Alan Badu. So linking into what you just said, Chris, it says factory output rises in July. China's manufacturing gains indicate steady revival of momentum, despite floods and the virus in some areas.
Well, I'm pretty sure that this is true of all regions now that we've come through the lockdown. So every manufacturing sector in the whole world will probably have seen a rise during July. The issue is that China's manufacturing sector is so much greater than that of any of its competitors, and so really what you're seeing is essentially bragging, because you don't hear this headline anywhere else.
We also don't know to the degree in which Chinese industry actually did shut down during this period.
Yes, if at all, because they had a technical lockdown. They claimed 80,000 people who'd been infected by it?
I can't remember.
But it was a ridiculously low figure. And if you were to look at the data, it actually trailed off very early. So the the reputation of that data is certainly to be brought into question, as indeed this is, because it could very well be the case that China's manufacturing, what with companies deserting China over what it's done, and particularly American companies, it might be the case that manufacturing has blipped upwards but may fall again very quickly.
Okay, so the next story is about Hong Kong. We finally got to the matter of Hong Kong. There was a story earlier that we were going to do about Hong Kong, but I think we should just put them together. So it says, rational decision made to postpone legislative elections amid high risk of virus infection. Now, I find this a bit too disgusting to comment on myself, but this entire paper has presented the suspending of elections in Hong Kong as a conscious choice by the Hong Kong government, whereas it's been imposed from the CCP, and they even owned up to it. Obviously, the issue is here that you can do one thing and say another, and you can't be questioned in a totalitarian country. So it says here, CNN is obviously criticising the HKSAR for not allowing the participation of separatists in the election. Well, it's not the HKSAR that's doing that, it's the CCP. It is difficult not to call it hypocrisy, given the fact that almost anywhere in North America and Europe, separatism is not tolerated. Now, I think there that the author has suffered from a bit of stupidity, because I'm pretty sure in most, if not every Western European nation, there is some form of separatist movement in government. We've got the SNP, Sinn Féin, which obviously wants to make Northern Ireland part of United Ireland. There's too many to count in Spain. You've got the Tyrolean
and things like that, like separatist movements who want to create their own country.
Well, actually, of course, they ran their own referendum and voted to leave Spain, didn't they? And the European Union issued an arrest warrant, so that's does not look good when you can compare your EU and China on the same page.
Well, to be honest, I mean, I wouldn't say that there's much of a difference in some respects, because that referendum was perfectly legitimate, but because it didn't meet certain criteria set by the European Union as to what constitutes a democratic referendum, it was consequently thrown out.
So it actually mentions Catalonia further on. We didn't notice this when we were reading through it. And Corsica as well. Separatism is ignited, supported and financed by foreign powers and would be considered treason. Now, I'm not sure what foreign powers were actually involved in the Catalonian referendum. If you know any, Chris, I'm not too sure.
I don't think there was any. I don't think anyone really cared, to be honest. This was a Spanish issue, an issue between the people of Catalonia and the people of wider Spain and the government.
Yeah, it's just a bit of a non-plus argument, because there's always foreign interest in what other countries are doing. By definition, we're sat here reading this paper.
Well, they've quoted CNN. Of all of the news networks that they've decided to put in the article, they've quoted CNN.
I think it's because CNN has a global reach, whereas other mainstream American news channels have far less reach around the world, where CNN is more of a global brand.
But CNN is also the biggest liar of the lot.
It is, but terrestrial CNN that Americans get is not the same as the CNN that you and I can access on our Sky or Virgin Media boxes.
I'm sure it is, because it's still the same bullshit.
Well, okay. China should widen its circle of friends. The United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, which the US president has called the largest, fairest and most balanced trade agreement in history, formally came into force on July the 1st. Centred on the basic idea of America First, the USMCA not only strengthens the rules of origin, intellectual property rights and digital trade, labour, environment and other standards based on the now defunct NAFTA agreement, but also contains a poison pill clause in Chapter 23, which says that if any of the three countries signs a free trade agreement with a non-market economy, the other partners have the right to withdraw after 6 months. So I believe this is China accidentally saying that it is a non-market economy, because the message about what the Chinese economy is and how it's run is even confusing to those in this paper and elsewhere that actually support China.
Well, I was just going to say, like, from the way that article is written, it's almost an admission by China that their economic model is wrong.
Yeah.
It says China should widen its circle of friends. It's just about annoyed everybody with its mishandling of the coronavirus, which has led to job losses insurmountable.
Yeah. I was already enraged by China. I mean, I am anyway, because it's a vile despotism. But also the fact that it was encroaching on Hong Kong very, very quickly, very violently before most people in the West were concerned about coronavirus.
Well, obviously, I mean, this is Hong Kong's just a plaything of the CCP, really. I think when you've got people in Hong Kong who are protesting in favour of the British Empire, and the fact that Hong Kong was typically seen as the last bastion of the British Empire when it was handed over in 1997, to have got to that point where imperialism by Britain is more preferable
to Chinese rule,
Chinese communism, I think there's something wrong in the way that area of politics is done. Really,
I would not disagree with you, Chris. So you picked this one out mainly for the headline because it's a bit of a contradiction. I don't know if it was deliberate or not. I don't think that these authors have got the sense of humour or the imagination. But it's joining hands in the pandemic battle. Since the beginning of 2020, the novel coronavirus, a phrase that annoys me, the novel coronavirus, has raged across the world during the period when the pandemic situation was at the severest in China. The United Arab Emirates government and people stood firmly with China by providing political support and supplies, attesting to an ironclad China-UAE friendship. Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, spoke over the phone with President Xi Jinping and posted tweets and expressed his willingness to provide an all-out support for China. Now, there's two countries that are a bit of an axis of evil.
The United Arab Emirates, I mean, are they democratic? Probably not.
And all those huge, grotesque buildings in places like Dubai that aren't built
in the middle of deserts as well.
Yeah, but that are also built by what is very close to slave labour.
Yeah, absolutely. But, I mean, both of those countries with very dubious human rights records. But what surprises me most of all...
Stoning, chopping of hands.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
camps.
That's the penalty for apostasy under the Islamic religion, if you were to read it in a fundamental way.
Nice get out clause at the end of that.
If you were to
go on.
Yeah, but the main issue with this article is it says joining hands in, what does that say, pandemic battle.
Yeah.
So we've got social distancing. You can't physically join hands without breaking your own social distancing rules. So,
but what if two people had two arms and both of those were a metre each? Then at least the torso would be 2 metres apart from the other person.
Yeah, but you're touching another person who...
with the most germ-ridden artifice on your body.
Yeah, apparently could be so infected by this... apparently could be so infected by this coronavirus, even though hardly anyone in the world has actually got it, and very few people have died of it.
Right, let's go to the last story. China offers a development path. It is not surprising that China's peaceful rise... For fuck's sake. It is not surprising that China's peaceful rise causes concerns for some in the West. So this is about us.
It causes concerns.
Yeah. So let's this is addressed to us, okay? Given just how different China is compared with the current hegemon, so it's pretty much saying it wants to be the new global hegemon, but that's pretty obvious. Recently, China has been flung back into the spotlight in a series of developments regarding the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah, it sounds very frightening.
That sounds like Airstrip 1 out of 1984 or something like that.
Yeah. the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. So that's obviously the area from which the Muslims are sent into concentration camps and quote-unquote re-education camps. Autonomous region and Huawei Technologies, all for the wrong reasons. The proper reaction is to calmly reflect upon what is going on and to call a spade a spade. I call political prisoners too. I don't think China do. A change of this magnitude never happens without some inconvenience. But it does bring about change, and often positive change. I think I'll go on for this one.
Yeah.
In this potentially multipolar world, China offers a concrete alternative, totalitarianism, for a development path, which may involve a standoff between a standoff. So that's pretty close to just saying conflict between neoliberalism in the West and conservatism in China, communism in China. I'll just cross out conservatism there. Certainly, the members of Chinese society tolerate a higher degree of state involvement in their daily lives. In fact, they tolerate maximum state involvement in their daily lives. And they don't tolerate it either. They have no choice.
They're an oppressed people.
They're
an oppressed people.
They are an oppressed people. And it is clearly a much more conservative society. You know what? Having read this, I've not really signified when I'm putting my own opinion into what I'm reading or what I'm not. So
I think
it's
very hard to avoid putting your own opinion into this particular news.
I know, but I might be making this author sound like he's schizophrenic. I actually can't decide which one he agrees with.
There's no proof as to whether he is schizophrenic or not.
This is Leonid Mironov.
Why do they all have Russian-esque names?
Apart from the Chinese ones, yeah.
But this is something that I was musing about just before we started this. The fact that Russia was meddling with the UK and the UK has been meddling with China, so that surely means that China is meddling with Russia.
Yeah.
And that probably explains why there's so many Russian names that are cropping up in this paper.
Many developing nations yearn for a development path that does not include a corruption of youth and an ignorance of tradition. Ironically, it is the world's most populous country that offers a respite from today's West. Well, that only operates if you aren't aware of China's history prior to the communist takeover. So that really does make one sick to read. Thus, one would expect I'm carrying on again. Thus, one would expect friction if the emerging pole is at odds with the hegemon. But again, the opportunity is in having a selection of development paths rather than the one-view-fits-all approach of the post-91 world. For China to truly become a genuine...
There's a Russian reference, by the way. The USSR collapsed in 1991.
Yeah. We'll never forget. For China to truly become a genuine pole, and for it to offer a valid development alternative, it has to fulfill 4 key provisions. It must demonstrate that China's path leads to a better quality of life, demonstrate that dealing with China can be mutually beneficial, offer infrastructure, both physical and soft, and to foster development with a partner of nations, and offer a set of values that is consistent with the first 3. That was like 6 or 7. I mean,
I really don't know if I can add much to what you've already said in this story. The only thing, the only thing that I would say is China has long had an issue with this obsession with Sinocentrism, which is the idea that China is like the centre of the world. I think at one point they misconstrued it as being the centre of the universe in which we lived.
Was that a medieval?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Did Confucius say that or something?
Yeah. It's basically Confucian sort of ideas and things like that. But this has long been present in Chinese philosophy, and they do not shy away from trying to show this off and demonstrate it at every point. It's just like an example which people who are listening to this might know is is along similar lines. Is like the hubris of the Conservative Party when they sort of dealing with the economy. They don't deal with it properly.
You mean the British Conservative Party?
The British Conservative Party. So the hubris of their economic activities. If we get growth, it's wow, it's spectacular. You know, that's what we always expected. When really, it's actually just a coincidence or something like that. There's a certain arrogance to the way that China behaves, and that is what so many people are against, and rightly so.
Well, it's beyond 30 degrees and we are sat inside, and I can't tell if that's the bottom of my drink or my sweat now dripping onto this state-run communist paper. There's just enough time to say fuck totalitarianism, fuck communism, fuck fascism, and fuck China. Chris, any departing words?
I don't buy from China. Don't buy from China. Starve the beast and let it crumble into dust. For the saying goes, ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
Thank you, Chris.